The rise of East Belfast U.V.F. boss Stephen Mackers Matthews notably overlaps with the untimely 2007 death of loyalist politician David Irvine, a former East Belfast U.V.F. prisoner who transitioned into peace process supporting politician upon his release. Irvine, who served 6 years for possessing explosives, morphed into leader of the Progressive Unionist Party, the political wing of the U.V.F., which gave the East Belfast U.V.F. a natural connection to the wider organization, and specifically its Shankill Road leadership, who for many years hadn't given East Belfast a second thought. Because throughout the Troubles, East Belfast was a known UDA stronghold. But as the peace process played out, that dynamic began to change. After a series of violent internal feuds in the early 2000s, the UDA's 6-man inner council collapsed, leaving the organization without a central command, and suddenly making each of its brigades independent paramilitary gangs. So following the in-house UDA murder of East Belfast UDA boss Jim Gray in 2005, the area was ripe for a U.V.F. takeover, and guiding that ship was a 43-year-old Stephen Matthews. But Mackers, unlike the late David Irvine, was not interested in peace, and for the next decade plus, built a sprawling criminal empire that extended throughout East Belfast and into County Down, operating largely independent of the Shankill Road without formally breaking ties, keeping one foot in the old and one in the new. Because while Mackers U.V.F. made a fortune selling drugs, extorting businesses, and taxing criminals, he also made sure to riot with the Catholics in the Short Strand every now and again, honor his fallen U.V.F. comrades, and deliver turkeys up and down the Newtonards Road at Christmas. So many everyday people in East Belfast simply chose to see the version of Mackers they wanted. But Mackers had his enemies, including men like Ian Ogle, a convicted rioter, and member of the East Belfast U.V.F.'s anti-drug Ravenhill Road Company.
He wasn't a criminal. He was a working man, a family man. He definitely didn't agree with the criminality going on in East Belfast, and he was very open about that.
Following a 2017 bar fight with drug-dealing members of the East Belfast U.V.F., Ian Ogle and his family were subjected to a 2-year campaign of intimidation, led by drug dealer Glenn Rainey and Newtonards Road commander Mark Sewell, aka The Child, as many viewed the convicted murderer Sewell a natural successor to Mackers. But despite countless threats and an attack on his workplace, Ian Ogle did not back down, a decision he would ultimately pay for with his life, when, on the evening of January 27, 2019, Ogle was stabbed to death in the street by a 5-man U.V.F. gang, led by Sewell, Rainey, Johnny Brown, Rab Spears, and Walter Irvine. In the months that followed, a total of 9 suspected participants would be charged with offenses related to Ogle's murder, with each granted bail as they awaited trial. And while the murder was not sanctioned by Mackers, it happened under his watch, and the Shankill Road was furious. It's worth noting that East Belfast, which is divided from the rest of the city by the River Loggan, can often feel like a world unto its own. And while separated by just 2 miles, the Newtonards Road and the Shankill Road are in many ways light years apart. Because, as far as the U.V.F. went, East Belfast was the only area that could rival the Shankill in terms of membership and funds. And under the control of Mackers, it had effectively split from the rest of the U.V.F. in all but name. 2 years after Ogle's murder, in February 2021, a 50-man U.V.F. gang paraded through East Belfast's Pitt Park in a show of strength widely seen as meant to intimidate those in Ogle's camp. The PSNI were able to get officers to the area as the masked men arrived, The police's presence is thought to have prevented an attack on William McCaughey, a U.V.F. historian who had publicly accused Mackers' gang of torturing ordinary Protestant people with drug dealing, extortion, and criminality. 11 residents, including Ian Ogle's wife Vera and daughter Tony, fled to the nearby Ballymac Friendship Center where McCaughey worked, remaining in the building for 8 days under a constant police presence. 22 arrests were made over the Pitt Park show of strength, and 3 people were charged, including Mackers, his 34-year-old son David, and Mackers' 56-year-old second-in-command Derek Lammy. But the charges against David Matthews would eventually be thrown out due to insufficient evidence. However, Ogle's murder had brought a sharper focus on East Belfast, and not just from the Shankill Road, but from the PSNI's paramilitary crime task force. Between 2018 and 2023, more than 30 men and women were jailed for selling cocaine and cannabis either for the East Belfast U.V.F. or by paying them protection money, with the PSNI declaring all dealing in East Belfast to be done on the U.V.F's behalf. For once, the East Belfast U.V.F. was looking very exposed, and the Shankill Road was ready to pounce. On Remembrance Day 2023, Shankill Road U.V.F. leadership issued a statement standing down 8 members of its 4th Battalion, East Belfast, including Mackers and Derek Lammy. It was a highly unexpected move, engineered by Harry Stockman and Winkie Irvine, who then replaced Mackers with a new leadership, supposedly led by anti-drug East Belfast U.V.F. man Raymond Morton, and Shankill Road leadership believing they had just exercised a bloodless coup. But the move, while headline-grabbing, was largely lip service in the East, with Mackers not going away, and the U.V.F. now officially split into 2 organizations, those loyal to Stephen Matthews and those loyal to the Shankill. However, the Shankill Road could now publicly say Mackers was no longer their problem, as they continued their violent overhaul against drug dealers, in hopes of retaining government peace cash and an end to historic prosecutions. But Mackers loyalists vastly outnumbered those loyal to the Shankill in East Belfast. And if both were still calling themselves the U.V.F., what did that mean for the wider organization's promises to clean up its act? Apparently, nothing. Around the time Mackers was stood down in late 2023, the British government gave the U.V.F. what it asked for in return for clamping down on criminality, as the controversial Northern Ireland Legacy Act was introduced across the province. The bill stopped new Troubles-era cases and inquests from starting, and offered conditional amnesty to those accused of killings, with total immunity to anyone who came clean about their crimes before a newly established Truth Commission. It was a big win for paramilitaries and the British Army, but an even bigger loss for the families of victims who had waited decades to see justice. But now that the U.V.F. no longer had to worry about Troubles prosecutions, it could focus solely on cleaning house. On Saturday, June 15th, 2024, 1,500 men bussed in from around Northern Ireland, lined the Lower Newtownards Road for the annual Robert Seymour parade. An East Belfast U.V.F. member shot dead by the IRA in 1988. The demonstration saw over 100 bands march up the Lower Newtownards Road in support for the new U.V.F. leadership installed by Stockman and Irvine, who was pictured at the event while still on bail from his 2022 gun charges. And while the march passed without incident, guns were allegedly placed in homes around the Lower Newtownards Road in preparation for a confrontation with those loyal to Mackers, who himself stayed inside the Con Club, also on the Lower Newtownards Road, to present end-of-season awards to his local football team. And while meant to be a show of strength for Shankill Road leadership, The Seymour Parade only hardened many attitudes within East Belfast, with the U.V.F. men and everyday locals believing the Shankill Road had crossed a line by bussing in members not from the area, and support for new leadership still just in the double digits. Mackers' U.V.F. was clearly going nowhere, and East Belfast, for better or worse, was behind him. A fact that would become abundantly clear a few months after the Seymour Parade. Remembrance Day 2024 marked the one-year anniversary of Mackers being stood down by the Shankill Road, and at commemoration events on the morning of Sunday, November 10th, the lopsided divide in East Belfast was on full display, as 300 men joined Stephen Matthews for a commemoration in the Ballybean estate on the outskirts of East Belfast, while just 50 showed up for a commemoration event organized by Raymond Morton along East Belfast's Woodstock Road. The move to stand down Stephen Matthews had backfired spectacularly for Harry Stockman and Winkie Irvine, with Mackers having the clear advantage despite not lifting a finger, and suddenly creating an unprecedented situation where two separate paramilitary units, both using the U.V.F. name, were both operating in the same area. And things were about to get a lot worse for Winkie. On December 2nd, 2024, after 2.5 years on bail, Irvine and co-accused Robin Workman changed their pleas to guilty to charges of possessing firearms and ammunition charges following their June 2022 arrests, ending any hopes of the major disclosure promised by Winkie's solicitor.
A barrister representing Winston Irvine argued that exceptional circumstances should be taken into account when the judge passes sentence next week. She said that the defendant's character and his proven long-term and ongoing commitment to peace building in Northern Ireland are relevant factors which should be taken into account.
On May 20th, 2025, Winkie Irvine was sentenced to 30 months in prison for the 2022 weapons find, while Robin Workman was sentenced to 5 years for the same crimes, with the judge calling Irvine's peace-building work exceptional and saying he did not see it fit to hand Irvine the statutory minimum of 5 years. The light sentence imposed on Irvine caused widespread public outrage, with Deputy Chief Constable Bobby Singleton acknowledging the sentence had caused the public to lose confidence in policing. The Public Prosecution Service would agree and launch an appeal on the judge's sentence, calling it unduly lenient. And while Irvine was being a good soldier by avoiding a messy trial, he lost everything as a result, including not just his freedom, but his once unassailable position within the U.V.F. On Wednesday, June 4th, Winkie Irvine was expelled from the Ulster Volunteer Force, following a vote of no confidence by company commanders and Chief of Staff John Bunter Graham. The expulsion followed an internal inquiry ordered by Graham that uncovered campaigns by Irvine to discredit fellow U.V.F. members, a series of police weapons finds Irvine suspiciously escaped, and footage of Winkie rioting with Republicans in 2005, for which he was never charged. But Irvine's controversial sentence nevertheless saw him moved into the Loyalist wing of Maghaberry Prison, where most U.V.F. prisoners inside its walls are not part of the mainstream organization, forcing Irvine to share tight space with his sworn enemies, including those loyal to Stephen Matthews.
In Northern Ireland, I believe we should have some serious conversations about why our trial process takes so much longer than in the rest of the UK, particularly when some cases involve paramilitary organisations and should be treated, if anything, with added urgency. Thank you.
In March 2025, 6 years after the murder of Ian Ogle, 9 individuals either pled guilty or were found guilty of the grisly attack, with the 5 men who beat and stabbed Ogle to death all receiving life sentences. 39-year-old Johnny Brown and 46-year-old Mark Sewell, who both pled guilty, Each received a minimum tariff of 17 years behind bars, while 43-year-old Walter Irvine, 38-year-old Glenn Rainey, and 42-year-old knife-wielding Rab Spears, who all pled not guilty, each received a minimum tariff of 20 years for the vigilante attack. And while justice has been served for the brave family of Ian Ogle, East Belfast continues to be the territory of Stephen Matthews, the man who allowed Ogle's killers to have positions of power. And while Ogle's family can finally walk the streets of East Belfast in peace, the reign of Mackers will not be changing anytime soon. And I wonder if the situation in East Belfast is the first of more to come. Because, for better or worse, the U.V.F. is going to continue to exist for a very long time. And the question is, will they continue to exist as a single organization, or as a series of independent criminal gangs like the UDA? In my opinion, a centralized U.V.F. is in everyone's best interest, and if they can also keep their membership largely anti-drug, the mainstream organization may slowly morph into the old boys club the British government so badly wants it to be. But I wouldn't bet on it, because until unionist parties like the DUP man up and condemn loyalist paramilitaries in the fashion that Sinn Féin condemns dissident Republicans, the U.V.F. and UDA will continue to be normalized across Northern Ireland. And while that may seem obvious, politics is a tricky game, and the DUP heavily rely on working-class Protestant voters to stay the country's top unionist party. It's a messy reality, but one that will continue to be the dynamic in Northern Ireland for many years to come. And until that dynamic is confronted, it will continue to be business as usual for the U.V.F.